and looking at the current situation with the COVID-19 crisis and the issues now being created within cabinet. So I just wanted Adrian to go through and explain to us in a bit more detail about what the papers are saying. Just give me your kind of view on the situation that Dominic Raab is in at the moment. He's now kind of our Prime Minister, leading the cabinet. What are the papers saying at the moment?
Okay, well, let's just be clear that our Prime Minister remains Boris Johnson. He has not resigned as Prime Minister, and he does, so there is no vacancy for that position. But what happens when the Prime Minister is indisposed is that he delegates some of his powers to another minister, and that other minister is Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, who also has the title First Secretary of State. We don't have a formal title of Deputy Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, but the First Secretary of State is the next person in line to take on responsibilities should the Prime Minister become incapacitated. Now, actually, as it turns out, the Prime Minister is said to be conscious, still doing some limited amount of work and conversations with his staff. So there is a sense in which the Prime Minister can give directions from his hospital bed, but obviously key committee meetings, detailed discussions have to take place within Whitehall at this time of crisis, and he can't be across all of that. So Dominic Raab will be chairing all of those key committees, from COBRA, which is the emergency committee that the government has, through to the cabinet, which is the ultimate decision-making body in the British system of government.
Right. So in terms of if, I mean, we're hypothesizing now, if Boris Johnson's condition is now severe, right, and he's not, and he makes a recovery, but his recovery is over a long term. It's not going to be a short-term recovery. What does that mean for the for the cabinet and the government? What does does that trigger an election, or will there be an appointment of Raab as our next leader, or what are the kind of the procedures here for that?
Well, for the last sort of 25 years, really since the era of Margaret Thatcher, I suppose, 35 years, we've had a system of government whereby the Prime Minister is hyperactive. She probably started that trend in the sense of getting up very early in the morning and going to bed very late at night and working from dawn until way past midnight. And all Prime Ministers have tried to live up to that expectation over the years. But it hasn't always been like that, There were many years when in the past, when Winston Churchill, for example, was Prime Minister, or William Ewart Gladstone, if you go back to the 19th century, but actually there were quite aged people as Prime Minister, and they obviously didn't take on as many tasks and long working hours as some of the more modern Prime Ministers have, who've been younger. Tony Blair, David Cameron, for example, have been a lot younger people. Theresa May had a capacity for very long hours and hard work. So there is a precedent for Prime Ministers to be primus inter pares, which is the old Latin phrase, first among equals. And Boris has always had a style of delegation ever since he was Mayor of London. He delegated a lot of the detail to his deputy mayors. And I would expect us to return to more of a system of cabinet government rather than necessarily sort of prime ministerial government, should he be sufficiently sick not to be able to work long hours. But this is all speculation. It may well be that Boris will bounce back within a couple of weeks. We just don't know at this stage, and that's really for the medics to determine.
I mean, if we look at some of the news cuttings that let me just go through some of them to just get an idea of what some of the commentators are saying at the moment. Let's see. So in the Times today, there was an interesting article. Let me just get it up. Let me just have a look at it quickly to see that, basically there is let's see where I've sent it platform, so it's on here. There is a situation now where we're not entering a constitutional crisis as such, but it's creating a lot of dilemmas and problems for the civil servants. So I just wanted you to just bring it up and see it here. News review. Okay, let me just go. I mean, you can see this is us doing things off the. If you just bring up the times that I sent over, the cutting, I think initially it's here, isn't it? But I mean, the point I'm trying to make though is that without a physical presence of a prime minister, the government will continue. There's not going to be an issue of a government not being, operational. But it just creates a lot more kind of issues for the people around Boris Johnson. If the main man isn't around to give orders and give a direction, surely you're going to have a lot more maneuvering, even if it's a national crisis. You're still, politicians by their own nature will start jockeying for positions and movement, and a lot of them are young guys who were appointed by Boris. So it kind of creates that situation.
Well, I'm not sure it does. No? I think what you have to realise is that this is a moment of national crisis. You may say it's in their nature to be jockeying for position, etc. But I think in a moment of national crisis, when everybody is carrying the burdens of office, and also carrying the responsibility of collective cabinet government, it would be a strange time to start going on what they call on manoeuvres, to jockey for position, to take over from the Prime Minister, because let's face it, as I said earlier, there's no vacancy. And in addition, when Boris does come back, he will not look kindly upon those ministers that got distracted thinking of themselves rather than thinking of the national interest. Okay, and so there's never a time to think of the national interest if it's now. Yeah. So while the media might speculate a little bit about this, I am not convinced, having spoken to one or two people close to the number 10, I'm not convinced that's happening. There's a very strong team actually in number 10. And so long as those staff in number 10 are loyal to the Prime Minister, and the permanent civil service remain extremely loyal to the Prime Minister, they will be doing the Prime Minister's bidding whether he's physically in Downing Street or not. Good. Okay, so just on, there's a Telegraph article that actually was on their front page, is about Dominic Raab casting doubt on whether the coronavirus lockdown will be reviewed next week, amid growing questions over who is going to make key decisions while the Prime Minister remains in intensive care. So these are the big dilemmas that you're going to have now without Boris physically being around. Now let's be clear though that the key decision to introduce what we call the lockdown, to introduce the restrictive measures whereby you only go to work unless it's absolutely necessary, you only go out of the house to shop or for one piece of exercise a day. That decision was not taken by Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. That decision was taken after receiving scientific advice on how best to flatten the curve, and it was taken by the entire cabinet. So I think it will take a decision of the entire cabinet again to ease those restrictions, or to continue them. Now, obviously, the default position is that they just continue in place. So if the cabinet did not reach agreement on what to do, I would imagine that they would just keep the status quo. But I don't think we're in that position to take that decision yet. Anyway, I think you've got to actually see not just infections falling off, but the rate of increase in death falling off. But as well. just picking up on the point about the powers that Raab has got, Lord Heseltine and John Major actually last night, and it's quoted in the Telegraph, called for greater clarity on Raab's powers. So, and there's a quote here saying, there must come a time when a deputy is effectively Prime Minister. I don't think we've probably quite got to that now. There must be a time when that happens, when the Prime Minister is unconscious, for example, and when decisions cannot be made by him. Then clearly somebody else has to make those decisions. And so for example, in the case of an act of terrorism or an act of, or a need to secure the national security of the nation, then those decisions would have to be taken by ultimately the person acting up for the Prime Minister, which in this case is Dominic Raab.
Yeah.
But the British Constitution has always been an unwritten constitution, and we don't have a formal job of Deputy Prime Minister. We never have. And I think that the system that we've got will suffice for this situation. What you don't want is a situation where formally the Prime Minister hands over his entire powers to another minister. And then you have that creates another problem of when he can get them back again.
Exactly.
So I think the situation we've got at the moment is actually quite an elegant solution, so that the Prime Minister remains the Prime Minister, but the First Secretary of State is acting on his behalf a lot of the time. I suppose that the equivalent would be the 18th century regent situation, where you might have had a king or queen. You had a regent acting on their behalf if they were incapacitated or unable to do the job. But at some point, the king or queen of sound mind and health, one would assume that they would have reclaimed those powers.
Yeah. Adrian Pepper, thank you very much for this morning's analysis. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. We'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you very much for your time. Stop stream. And that was Adrian Pepper from Pepper Public Affairs, giving us a quick run through of the big story in the Telegraph. We're going to stop the feed now. We're going to go over to Constantine Buhaya in our next feed.